And good day, dear colleagues. I hope everything is going well. I see that there is a lot of activity on the forums. And as I mentioned before, yes, this week is perhaps the heaviest week. So, something really important that I just wanted to pass on to you rather than writing a long email, just thought I'd make this quick. For us is to keep in mind that during this inquiry, we are in the process of preparing for the evaluation visit. So, the idea is to plan to ask questions that are going to allow you to have more clarity and for you to help the school understand what your areas of concern are, all this based on the documentation that you have chosen to read. So, things to keep in mind. You're going to be encouraging, you're going to have an open dialogue. Remember that this is a nurturing process where we are coaching the school into better program implementation. So we're going to keep in mind that we're going to ask inquiry questions that show our interest in the school. So it's really important for us to read through the documentation to try and make notes of things that really call our attention in terms of the context, whether it is school context or cultural context. So those are things that we're going to keep in mind when thinking about the questions. So, our task for this inquiry this week is to curate the questions. And you've been doing a wonderful job looking at each other's questions. And it's at this stage that I want to pry a little bit more. So, rather than me just posting things on the forums for you, I'm just going to highlight a few things that I've seen and just keep in mind the approach that we want to have when looking at those questions. So first of all, we're going to keep three focus areas. You're going to have the structure of the questions. You're going to keep in mind who the audience is, because remember that we've already looked at the agenda and we know that there will be different stages and we're going to be meeting different people throughout the days of the visit. So all stakeholders are a part of the process and we want to find out, well, how involved were they? How much do they really know? And most importantly, we're going to keep open the tone for the communication. So that really sets everything for the visit. So at this stage, you've read everything related to the appreciative inquiry framework, and we want to ensure that we build up on that. So we want to sort of create a school story. You know, when you're reading the documents, you have an idea of who they are, what their approach to the program is, how much have they really developed, and whether or not they, in general terms, because sometimes it's difficult to see through the paperwork, in general terms, do you see that they have engaged with this as a positive process? Have they really engaged in reflection, or has it been sort of a paper creation exercise? So it's really important for us that as we work with this learning engagement, that you continue what you're doing right now with other colleagues in the forum, where you're reading the questions, you're looking at the things, you're making suggestions of how to improve those questions. Because ultimately, what we want is to turn in a knowledge artifact that will serve for us as part of our portfolio when we are preparing to go on those visits. So keep in mind that when you're structuring your questions, you want to have a basis on the documentation or on the observations. So let's pretend that you read something in the documents and that kind of gave you a picture, but then when you get there to the visit, you realize that things are not really what you thought they were going to be. You imagine things in a way, and then when you get there, it's completely different. Then you just keep that in mind. And when you're phrasing your questions, you go back to exactly that. You can actually ask questions related to that in terms of your perception of how the document came through versus what you're actually seeing in practice. So it's important that we're able to make the school feel that they're seen, that they were heard, that most importantly, they were read, that all those pages that they created for the documentation have been considered by the evaluation visit. So this is what appreciative inquiry is. There is no recipe, no formula to it. Each visit is going to be unique. However, we want to be as clear as possible. So make sure that you eliminate things that are evident, things that are really known, and that you just go straight forward to what you're looking for. If you observed something in the documents or if you saw something during the meetings, that you really look at that in particular rather than giving them a whole contextual story. At this stage, minutes are valuable. So in a way, it's us validating what they have done, us validating their efforts, and helping them to take ownership of what they have done. So instead of thinking only on closed questions with very specific answers, we frame the questions with a format that allows for deeper reflection and deeper conversation. So we try to avoid the yes and no types of questions. Second, we're going to keep in mind our audience. And so we want to make sure that if we think, for example, we know that the agenda has already told us who will be a part of each of the meetings. So we know that there are groups of teachers and the school chooses who are the people that are going to attend those meetings. Well, in this particular case, with these evaluation visits, we are going to see um, committees. So the school is going to create committees where people are a part of that committee and they get involved in that area. So it's important that you keep that in mind, because what will happen is that it may be the case that you might ask some questions and people will not have been involved in that particular area. So when you develop your questions, let's say, for example, for the category of purpose, you have to make sure that the questions are just pertaining to that particular category, because it may be the case that the people that were in that committee did not take part in the environment committee, in the deep discussions of the environment committee. So you're going to have the whole of the documentation is being read by the whole of the school, but not everybody has been a part of every committee. So it is important that you keep in mind who is your audience, who was a part of the committee, who took part in the creation of documents or in the modification of documents. And finally, if you keep in mind the people that might have been interested parties in the process, but were not members of any of the committees, but then were suddenly a part of the meeting. These are people that might be a little bit more quiet, but you give them questions that allow for them to also feel involved in part of the process. Finally, we have the tone. So sometimes the questions are introduced um, by highlighting certain shortcomings or certain things that are not like on point. And the purpose behind these questions is because we might be curious and we want to learn more about the process. So we're going to try to set a tone that from our side is an inquiry tone. We want to make sure that we understand that the school may be nervous. And that's the reason why the preliminary review done by the program leader addresses all those stressful issues of documentation and things that are not in place. So in reality, when we are in the meetings, it's not the case that things are not in place or that we're trying to catch out the school. Absolutely not. Make sure that as you frame your questions, you're using the frame models that are in the resource library. So if you go to the documentation in the resource library in the platform, you're going to see how to nurture some of those inquiry type of questions that will encourage reflection, that will develop collaboration, that will allow people to analyze, to interpret, and to have these deep discussions. And that's the fun part of the visit, that you're able to ask these guiding questions, and they're exciting questions that are going to allow the people in your meeting to really show how they have engaged in this process. On a final note, keep in mind that you are focusing on development. That's what appreciative inquiry is about. We want to see that the school has been doing great jobs in what they're doing. They're working well in their processes, but we also want to see how are they thinking about further development. The whole idea behind this process of evaluation is, yeah, of course, to see what they have done. They've done their self-study, they've reflected on it, but the big question is, what's next? Will they be able to continue perfecting their practices? Are they going to continue improving their practices? And we know that in everyday school life, policies will always develop. Things are going to change. Sometimes national requirements make things change. Other times it's the context, the audience, sometimes the population of the school changes. So rather than a very local, certain part of the community attending the school, it starts to become more international. So these are all things that you can keep in mind when you are building your questions. Keep in mind that you're going to keep these forum questions as part of your toolkit. So make sure that you take notes on this so that you can use them further in your visits. And though I mentioned before that each visit is a unique experience, it's also important that you have like some starting questions. And this is a great opportunity for you. So I highly encourage you to continue working the way that you've been working, to continue giving each other feedback, and to keep in mind everything that I've mentioned before. I'll continue seeing you in the forums, and good job with everything you've been doing up to now. Thank you, and until later.